Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm thrilled to have James Liu with us to dive deep into prompt engineering, a topic that's increasingly vital as we see advancements in large language models. James, let's start with the basics. In your view, what exactly is prompt engineering?
Thanks, Maya. At its core, prompt engineering is about communicating with AI models in a way that elicits the most accurate and relevant response. It's like providing clear instructions but with more nuance, since the language model interprets meaning based on vast amounts of data rather than explicit programming. The way you ask questions or give instructions directly impacts the quality and relevance of the AI's response.
Absolutely, and I think people sometimes underestimate just how much of a skill it is. Prompt engineering, especially as models become more advanced, is evolving almost like a new form of programming language. We've seen how specific wording can make a big difference. Do you find there are certain principles or techniques that consistently help when crafting prompts?
Yes, definitely. A few core techniques really stand out. One is to be as specific as possible. If a prompt is too vague, the model might generate irrelevant information. A common method is the zero-shot approach, where you simply give a single instruction. But often, I find that a few-shot technique, where you include a couple of examples, makes the prompt far more effective. It's about guiding the model with structure and tone, almost like setting the scene.
Good point. I often suggest that people treat the prompt like a conversation with context. If you imagine the model as a knowledgeable but non-expert assistant, you'll see how to layer instructions in a way that builds understanding. I'm curious, James, do you ever use chain of thought prompting, where you encourage the model to think through a problem step by step?
Yes, chain of thought prompting is fantastic, especially for complex questions. If you ask for a solution step by step, the model is more likely to follow a logical path and arrive at a coherent answer. It's particularly useful in areas like math, reasoning, or even when writing detailed plans. For example, instead of just asking, "How can I improve my business's online presence?" you might say, "List each step I should take to improve my business's online presence and explain why each step is important." This helps the model generate a structured response rather than a general one.
Exactly, and it's a way to combat what I call the information dump problem, where a prompt is too open-ended. I also find it helpful to specify format in prompts. For instance, saying "answer in bullet points" or "provide a summary in 2 paragraphs" can make a big difference, especially if you're working on generating structured data or specific output forms. Have you experimented with prompt format constraints like that?
All the time. Format constraints are essential, especially in professional applications where precision is crucial. Let's say I'm working with a legal team using the model to draft contract summaries. I'll specify a format, summarize the contract with key points on parties involved, terms, and obligations, each in one sentence. Without that, you often get long-winded answers or miss key details. It's about striking a balance between guiding the model and giving it enough freedom to interpret.
You touched on a good point about balance. Sometimes, we have to let the model be creative, particularly when dealing with open-ended tasks, like generating ideas. But even there, a prompt should direct the focus. For example, instead of saying, "Give me some ideas for a new app," you could say, "Suggest 5 creative app ideas targeting busy professionals for managing their schedules more effectively." This way, you're channeling the model's creative energy into a productive direction.
Precisely. And I'd add that when working with constraints, it's also useful to specify the model's role within the prompt. This technique has been increasingly popular, starting prompts with phrases like "you are a marketing expert" or "act as a project manager." It influences the model's persona and style of response, giving it an implicit guide on how to approach the task.
That's a great one. Specifying a role can indeed improve the response quality. But I do think there are limits. Sometimes, the model gets overly verbose if you give it too many instructions. I suggest starting with a more general prompt and gradually adding layers of complexity. It's a bit like debugging code. Do you approach prompt testing iteratively, or do you have a preferred structure from the get-go?
I definitely iterate. I'll start with a high-level prompt, and if the response isn't hitting the mark, I'll refine it by adding specific elements one at a time. For example, if I want the model to generate insights from data, I might first ask for a summary and then add a requirement to include statistical interpretations. The key is to test how the model handles each piece of guidance and adjust accordingly.
Iteration is so important. Another technique I find helpful is error-driven prompt refinement. Basically, if I notice the model making certain types of mistakes, I go back and adjust the prompt to mitigate those. For instance, if it misinterprets data points or goes off topic, I'll adjust my language to emphasize focus areas or clarify what data to include.
Absolutely. In fact, error-driven refinement highlights another aspect: feedback loops. When you can set up a way to evaluate the output against specific criteria, it becomes much easier to refine prompts in a systematic way. This is particularly valuable when working with models in production environments, where you need consistency.
That's a perfect segue to my next point: evaluation metrics. I think one of the most challenging things is objectively evaluating prompt effectiveness. In some cases, we can use qualitative feedback, but in structured tasks, quantifiable metrics become invaluable. For example, if a prompt generates customer support responses, we can measure response relevance and helpfulness by analyzing customer satisfaction post-interaction. Do you have any best practices for evaluating prompts?
When possible, I measure performance based on the specific application's requirements. For example, if we're using the model to suggest ideas, we could rate the ideas on novelty, feasibility, and relevance. If it's summarizing content, I might look at factors like completeness, accuracy, and conciseness. I also use comparison testing, running the same task with slightly different prompts and assessing which yields the best results.
Yes, A/B testing or prompt comparison can be very revealing. You can even perform multivariate testing by tweaking small aspects of each prompt. What's nice is that these models allow for a flexible, iterative approach, so we're always fine-tuning. So, to wrap up, what do you think the future holds for prompt engineering? Will it become more streamlined, or will we see even more sophisticated prompt techniques emerging?
I think we'll see both. As language models get better at understanding complex instructions, some aspects of prompt engineering might become more intuitive. But with more specific applications, I believe prompt engineering will evolve as a specialized skill. Future prompts might include a mix of structured templates and real-time user feedback to continually improve output quality. We'll see more refined methods that adapt based on ongoing model performance data.
That makes sense. And I think prompt engineering might eventually be considered its own kind of digital literacy, necessary for working effectively with AI. It's been wonderful discussing this with you, James. Thank you for sharing your expertise, and thanks to everyone who joined us. We hope this conversation inspires you to experiment with your own prompt strategies and explore how nuanced language can guide AI to deliver meaningful insights.